20th November 1995, a Wednesday evening in Britain. 23 million people sat in front of their televisions, not for a game, not for a film, but for one woman. A woman who had spent 14 years inside the most closely watched marriage in the history of the modern world, and who had decided on this particular Wednesday evening to tell the truth. She sat in a pale blue jacket. Her eyes were done deliberately darker than usual, softer than the woman the cameras usually caught. And when the journalist asked her about the marriage, she did not flinch. She looked into the camera and she said something that will be quoted for the next 30 years. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. 7 words. 7 words that ended in a fairy tale, that exposed a betrayal, that changed a monarchy, and that cost a woman perhaps more than she ever understood, everything she had left. The story is about Prince Charles and Princess Diana. It is a story about love and betrayal, about duty and desire, about what happens when people are most powerful in institution in world class decide that one woman's pain is inconvenient. And it is a story about what infidelity actually cost. Not just the person's betrayal or the person betrayed, everyone. Stay with me. Welcome to Purpose in Waiting. I am Brandon. If this is your first time here, you have just found one of the most honest documentary channels on YouTube. Before we go further, please subscribe and hit that button right now. Thank you. Because what you're about to hear is more than a royal story. It is a mirror. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the wedding, before the wedding. Because this story, like most great betrayals, did not begin with an affair. It began with a mismatch so fundamental that people closest to it couldn't really see clearly, and no one said a word. In 1970, Prince Charles, 21 years old, attended a polo match. There he met a young woman named Camilla. She was vivacious, quick-witted, unintimidated by his title. She made him laugh. They began a relationship. But in the world Charles inhabited, marriage was not merely a personal decision. It was a constitutional one. And Camilla, with no royal lineage, no spotless public record, was not considered suitable. Charles joined the Navy in 1971. The relationship faded with the distance, and in 1973, Camilla Shand married someone else, Andrew Parker Bowles, a British Army officer. She moved on, or appeared to. Now, here's what most people gloss over, and it is the detail that makes everything that follows make a different kind of sense. Charles and Camilla remained friendly even after their marriage, even after years passed. You know, there is a verse in Proverbs 4 verse 23 that says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Whether you are a religious person or not, there is something almost prophetically true about those words in this context. Because Charles never fully guarded his, not from her after all. And what flowed from that unguarded place would eventually flood everything. Stay with me. By 1980, the pressure on Charles to marry was intense. He was 31, the heir to the throne, and the institution had requirements. His circle, his family, his advisors all pointed in a similar direction. For someone young, someone suitable, someone with no past that the press could use, Lady Diana Spencer. She was a 19-year-old, the daughter of an earl, quiet, warm, instinctively kind. She had adored Charles from a distance, the way a young woman might adore someone older, accomplished, positioned at the very center of the world she had grown up on the edges of. They had known each other briefly. The courtship was short. 6 months. 6 months. And on July 29th, 1981, in front of an estimated population of about 750 million people watching on TV, the largest television audience in history at that moment, Lady Diana Spencer, who had celebrated her 20th birthday less than a month earlier, married Charles, Prince of Wales, at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The world called it a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as Diana would come to understand, are stories told by people who cannot see the ending. Here is what I want you to know about the years that followed. Both Charles and Diana had engaged with the press about the breakdown of their marriage. But in the early years, neither of them was speaking publicly. What was happening privately was something entirely different. Charles and Diana's relationship quickly became rocky, and according to Charles' authorized biography, he began an affair with Camilla in 1986. 5 years into the marriage, 2 sons already born, William in 1982, Harry in 1984. A family, by any photograph, a fracture underneath, and Diana knew. She said later that she had known almost from the beginning that Camilla had not fully left. And that knowledge, held privately, managed quietly, performed against daily produced. A suffering that most people watching from outside could not see. She developed bulimia. She struggled with depression. She reached for help in ways the institution around her was fundamentally not equipped to provide. And she was left largely to manage it alone. There is something important I want to say about what Diana was experiencing, because it would be too easy and too incomplete to simply say she was betrayed and leave it there. What Diana was living through is what psychologists call rational invisibility, the specific experience of being present in someone's life, present publicly, present legally, present as a mother to their child, and still being somehow unseen. Dr. Sue, whose work on attachment and connection is among the most rigorous in modern relationship psychology, writes that the deepest wound in any relationship is not the act of betrayal itself. It is a message that betrayal sends. The message that says, "You were not enough to make me choose you." For a woman who had given everything the institution asked her for, the title, the public role, the heirs, and the relentless performance of a happiness that did not exist, That message was devastating. And it was a message she received not only once, but every day for years. By 1992, the marriage was unsalvageable. That year, Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story, a biography that Diana herself had secretly contributed to. Her own words, recorded on a tape and smuggled out, not because she wanted to embarrass the institution, no, but because she was drowning and needed someone to know the truth. The book described depression, self-harm, a marriage that had been hollow almost from the start. In December 1992, Charles and Diana had announced their separation publicly, formally, after 11 years, but the separation was not the end, not even close. Please stay with me. If you have watched this far, you already have a sense that this story is about something much larger than the royal family, so please subscribe to Purpose in Waiting. This channel exists to tell stories like this one, honesty, without sensationalism, with the full weight of what they actually mean. Hit the subscribe bell and let's continue. In 1993, a recording surfaced. It had been taped in 1989, a private phone call between Charles and Camilla. Intimate, unmistakable, a conversation between two people who had maintained something across years of obligation and distance. The tabloids called it Camilla Gate. Funny. The British public called it confirmation for something they had suspected. And Charles, in an authorized biography published in 1994, confirmed what the tape had made apparent. He admitted to adultery. That is so sad. But when Arthur Jonathan asked directly whether he had tried to be faithful, Charles said yes, until the marriage had broken down irretrievably. The semantic precision of a man who knew how much each word would cost. But the admission was there, and it landed on Diana like something she had known for years, but had never confirmed it in public stage. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 3 says, "There is a time to tear down and a time to build." Ecclesiastes does not tell us that the tearing down is wrong. It tells us that it has its season. And sometimes in relationships, in institutions, in public narratives built on foundations that cannot hold, the tearing down is the only honest thing left to do. What happened between November 1993 and November 1995 was a slow, painful, necessary tearing down of a performance that had been maintained too long, of a fairy tale that had never fully been true. And it was Diana who finally chose to be the one to say it clearly. November 20th, 1995, a Wednesday evening in Britain. We began here, so let us go deeper into what happened in the sitting room at Kensington's Palace. Filmed in Diana's sitting room at Kensington's Palace, the explosive interview made history because of the frank way Diana divulged intimate details of life as a royal and her marriage, including her struggles with postnatal depression, bulimia, and most shockingly, her husband's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. It aired on November 20th, 1995, and was watched by nearly 23 million people in the UK and 200 million people worldwide. 200 million people in 1995 without social media, without YouTube, without an algorithmic amplification we take for granted. Just a woman, a camera, and the truth she had been holding for 15 years. She spoke about bulimia. She spoke about the depression. She spoke about the specific isolation experience of being surrounded by an institution and having no one inside she could trust. How painful could that be? And then she was asked about Camilla Parker Bowles, and she said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," she rephrased. The room watching around the world went quiet, not because it was surprising, but it was true, and because truth spoken clearly in its own voice by the person who lived it has a specific quality that no amount of institutional management can fully contain. What I want to sit with for a moment before we move on to the next is the courage that interview required. Not because speaking on television is inherently courageous, but because Diana was in that sitting room doing something that the people who loved her had begged her not to do. She was allowing herself to be fully seen, not just curated version, not the Princess of Wales performing dignity in a different marriage or a difficult marriage, the actual woman with the actual pain, the actual truth, and she chose that exposure with all its risk, with all its cost, over the continued performance of a life that had been fully hers. Dr. Brené Brown writes in A Daring Great, "The vulnerability is not weakness." That the courage to be seen, truly seen, without armor, without management, is one of the most profound expressions of strength available to a human being. Diana, in that sitting room on that Wednesday evening, was daring greatly in the most public and most personal way imaginable. After the interview, the palace machinery finally moved. The couple signed their divorce in August 1996, 1 year before Diana's death, and in August 1996, 15 years after the wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral that 750 million people watched, the marriage was over. Legally, finally. Diana was 35 years old, free in the specific, complicated, costly way that freedom arrives after a long captivity. She threw herself in a charitable work with a kind of energy that people around her describe as almost feverish. She campaigned against landmines in Angola and Bosnia. She visited AIDS patients when the stigma around the disease was still enormous. She was becoming, in her post-royal life, something the managed life inside the palace had always partially obscured. Herself, fully free, publicly herself. In summer of 1997, Diana was 36. She had spent recent weeks traveling the Mediterranean, France, the Italian Riviera, with Doti Fayed, the son of the Egyptian bishop Mohammed Al-Fayed. Their romance was new, documented by photographers at every turn. By the last week of August, Mohammed Al-Fayed had hosted his son, Diana, and her 2 children, Prince William and Harry, then 15 and 12 respectively, aboard his yacht, the Johnny Carr. The party spent 9 days aboard the vessel. The holiday was the subject of intense media attention, with paparazzi jockeying to get photos of the new couple as they swam and laughed and excited, seemingly in a happiness that was only just beginning. The evening of August 30th, 1997, Paris, Diana and Dorothy arrived in the city after flying from Sardinia. They intended to stay one night before returning to London. Diana had told friends she was looking forward to seeing William and Harry. She had plans. She had a future. Dorothy purchased a $205,000 diamond ring, which he intended to give to Diana later that evening. The night was supposed to end with a proposal. It did not end that way. Just after midnight on August 31st, 1997, after dinner, Diana and Dorothy tried to ditch the paparazzi by slipping out the back of the Ritz Hotel and living in a different vehicle. Dorothy and the driver, Henry Paul, were pronounced dead at the scene. Diana was taken to the PDSR Betrayal Hospital. Surgeons worked for 2 hours. She died from severe internal injuries, particularly to her heart. She was 36 years old. 36 years old. The age of a woman who had just begun to live as herself, who had survived the marriage that was not what anyone had promised her, who had found her voice, who had used it, who had been, in those final months, something approaching the woman she had always had the potential to be. 36. In the weeks that followed, mourners left more than 1 million bouquets outside Kensington's Palace. Diana's funeral in London on September 6th was watched over 2 billion people who had loved a woman they had never met, who had seen in her something they recognized. The specific courage of a person who insists on being who insists of being in the real world that keeps demanding performance. I want to pause here and ask you something directly, because this documentary is not simply history, it's a mirror. What does the story of Charles and Diana actually teach us about betrayal? Not the royal version, I mean the human version. The first thing it teaches is something Dr. Esther Perel has said in her work more honestly than anyone else. The affair did not begin in 1986. The condition for it began much earlier. A marriage built on institutional requirement rather than genuine compatibility. A man who had never fully closed the door on the previous attachment. A woman who was never fully seen by the institution she just joined. None of this excuses the betrayal, but all of it explains it. And understanding is not the same as forgiving, but it is the beginning of the work. The second thing this story teaches: silence has a cost. Diana spent years managing her reality privately, suffering privately, performing publicly, and the cost of the silence was not neutral, it was cumulative. it was compounded. It showed up in her body, in her mental health, in the fractures that ran through every relationship she had inside that institution. James 5 verse 16 says, "Confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed." Whether you take that literally or as a wisdom about the general human need for truth-telling, the principle holds. We are not designed to carry the truth alone. The truth shared, even at enormous cost, it always or almost less destructive than the truth held in silence until it finds its own way out. Diana's interview in 1995 cost her something. The palace withdrew, the divorce accelerated, the relationship with the institution never recovered. But she had told the truth in her own voice, on her own terms. And whatever the institution took from her after that, it could not take that back. The third thing this story teaches: what you build in the absence of truth will eventually be unmade by it. Charles and Camilla spent years, decades, in a love that was real, birth that was forced into the shadows. The marriage to Diana was, in part, a product of a world that demanded a certain performance and refused to accommodate the truth underneath it. And the cost of that refusal was not contained to the two people in marriage. It spread to Diana, to William and Harry, who grew up watching their mother suffer and their family fracture, to Camilla, who was publicly verified for years as the villain in a story whose full complexity was never given its proper accounting, to the institution whose handling Diana's death, the queen initially refusing to allow the flag of Balmoral to be flown at half-mast, declining to make a formal statement immediately after Diana's death, nearly collapsed the public's relationship with the monarchy entirely. Truth, suppressed long enough, does not disappear. It transforms into grief, into scandal, into the kind of institutional damage that takes generations to repair. If this story is giving you something to think about beyond the royal family, about truth, about betrayal, about the cost of silence, subscribe to Purpose in Waiting. This is why this channel exists. Hit the subscribe button, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you. Let me give you something to carry from this story, not as a royal observer, as a man navigating his own relationships. The first question worth asking yourself honestly: are there truths in relationships, or are there truths in your relationship? Things you know, things you feel, things that are real, that you have been performing around rather than speaking, not to create drama, not to cause pain, but because the silence has been building something in you that is not sustainable. The question is worth sitting with. The second: is there a version of yourself, a desire, a need, a part of you who actually you are, that you have allowed to go underground rather than name it to a person you are with? Because what goes on the ground does not die, it finds a way out. Charles and Camilla are an example of that truth, playing out across 30 years at the cost of everything around them. And the third one, if someone in your life is asking to be seen, not performing, not managing, but genuinely seen, what will it cost you to be present for that? Not to fix anything, to witness it. Diana asked to be seen for years, but an institution did not know how, and the cost of that failure was paid by everyone. November 20th, 1995, we began here. So let us end here. In that sitting room at Kensington Palace, in the 20th minutes before the interview aired, Diana was alone. The crew had finished setting up. The palace did not know it was happening. The BBC's board of governors did not know. The institution she had spent 14 years inside, the most powerful symbolic institution in the English-speaking world, did not know. And Diana sat in her pale blue jacket with her darker than usual eyes and made the decision that the truth was worth more than the performance. Psalms 34 verse 18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and serve those who are crushed in spirit." Whether you hold that verse as faith or as a poetry, there is something deeply true in the image it offers. That brokenheartedness are not forgiven. That the crushed spirit is not the final word. Diana was brokenhearted. She was also in the sitting room doing the bravest thing she had ever done. And the world, 200 million people who watched and 2 billion people who mourned her 2 years later, fell for the truth of it. Not because she was a princess, because she was a person, real, wounded, refusing at the most important moment to pretend. She died at 36, barely a year after the divorce. At the beginning of what might have been the most genuine chapter of her life, we will never know what that chapter held. But we know what she left. A way of being in the world that insisted on the truth over performance, that insisted on being seen over being managed, that cost her everything and made her paradoxically, permanently unforgettable. The question the story leaves me with, and the one I want to leave you with, is not about Charles. It is about the monarchy. It is this: in your own life, in your own relationships, are you the person performing a fairy tale? Or are you the person with the courage to say the true thing, even when it costs you, even when the institution around you, whatever your institution is, would you rather stay quiet? Diana showed us that the truth can be more powerful than the crown. That being genuinely known is worth more than being perfectly presented. That the most important decision you will ever make in a relationship is not what you say when everything is comfortable. It's what you say when the performance is no longer sustainable. Say the true thing, master yourself first, and build your legacy. Thank you.